Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. It's the Cake Doctor here. I've recently finished reading this book by Jade Bowler, also known on YouTube as Unjaded Jade. It's a lovely book, a very useful book about how to study and study techniques. It's useful for students at all levels. As you all know, I'm a doctor, so you may be asking, why am I interested in study guides and study techniques? Well, first of all, as doctors, we never stop reading, studying and learning. And secondly, to complete my surgical training in orthopedics, I have to sit a very massive exam in about 18 months, which is called the FRCS. So for me, that's quite topical. So anything I can get my hands on to help me with studying, revising, learning, I find that very useful. In terms of the book itself, I found it very useful, very easy to read, nicely written, very candid, touches on things such as mental health in students, stresses of exams, as well as all the helpful practical study techniques. I'll touch on a few take-home messages from the book. Obviously, you can read the whole book, you can get it from Amazon or elsewhere, but the key take-home messages for me were: 1, motivation, 2, how we learn, and 3, study techniques. So if we start with motivation, Jade there starts with recommending that you always have in the back of your mind your why, as in why you're revising, what's your goal, what do you want to achieve. And if you have the why sorted, that tends to help in every step of the way. So if you know why you're doing what you're doing, then you'll have that constant motivation. Like the book by Simon Sinek that says, start with why. So it's called Start With Why, and that's quite important. Another part of the motivation is adopting a growth mindset. And when she says a growth mindset, she says you whenever you say, I haven't achieved that specific thing, always add yet. I haven't achieved it yet. So always have a growth mindset, always plan to achieve, plan to keep going, and even the wisest of the wise, the smartest people in the world had the same way of thinking. So Einstein once said he didn't think that he was smarter than other people, but he stayed with problems longer. So if you keep that growth mindset, if you stay with things longer, if you have a plan, have goals, then you will certainly do well with your study techniques and with your revision. Next is how we learn. So obviously we somehow have to play the system, somehow have to learn the exam techniques and learn how to cope on the day itself, and being timed and working in a stressful environment. But also we have to bear in mind that the whole point of those exams and the revision and the stress is that we end up learning something. So it's quite important to know how we actually learn and focus on that bigger picture. So Jade introduces a very nice model with the acronym SAD or SAAD, and I found that quite helpful. So the S is spaced repetition. So it's an idea that's been championed by many people, and it drives a lot of learning theory nowadays, in that if you learn something and if you just read it the once, it's going to disappear from your memory. Whereas if you learn it and then keep revisiting it at constant or semi-constant intervals, then you will be able to remember it. It will kind of develop deeper into your brain that you won't be able to forget it. There's something called a forgetting curve, where, like we said, if you start learning something and you never revisit it again, you will never remember it. But if we keep revisiting it, you kind of gradually build the amount of memory related to this information in your brain, and that's based on some of the neuroscientific theory around our brains, is that something called neuroplasticity. Whereas if you learn something and then keep repeating it, keep repeating it, keep applying it, then that encourages your brain to form new connections within your brain cells, and that helps keep that information there. Next is active recall, and that's really important. That's really shifts how we've thought about learning for a long time. So people who like to just read and highlight in books, this really doesn't tend to kind of cement the information in your mind and your brain. Whereas if you actively force yourself to try and remember that stuff, then you will remember it, then you will learn it. So spending an hour or two highlighting doesn't mean anything, but spending half an hour doing flashcards, asking yourself questions about what you've read, that is useful, that is helpful. Next is associations, and that's kind of one helpful technique when you come to learn stuff, especially stuff that doesn't really come naturally or has no obvious ways of understanding. So complex theories in either physics or whatever, associations are quite useful. So if you can associate something in your mind with something that you've seen, then you'll be able to remember it. So as an example, so like I said, I'm a doctor, so if there is a certain piece of information relating to certain condition, certain disease, then I may well read it in a book, but it may not make so much sense for me until I see it in a patient and I remember that patient. And because I remember that patient, I'll remember that piece of information and it will kind of never leave my brain. So that's the power of associations. Now, final point in this model is the desired difficulty. So the amount of learning we achieve is directly correlated to the amount of difficulty we put ourselves through in our revision and reading and preparing. So if we just sit there half daydreaming and like I said, reading or highlighting, then that doesn't achieve anything. But if we sit there forcing ourselves to summarize what we've read, to answer the end of chapter questions, do past papers, force ourselves to recall the stuff we've read, that desired difficulty translates into your level of understanding and learning.